Hello, BookTube. I thought we'd briefly go over some of the literary mail that I got today and last week, I think, on Saturday. Mainly two of the greatest literary reviews in English, the New York Review of Books and the TLS. In the latest New York Review of Books, there's a whole bunch of great stuff. I'm glad to see they made the decision to cut off the ongoing letters page debate about the controversy that cost them their editor. I'm glad to see they cut that off. They're not letting that run on. They're just going back to business as usual and letting the whole question die. So instead, we just have a jam-packed issue full of stuff. It opens up with Bill McKibben on the recent climate change report that is extremely sobering, but nobody writes about this stuff better than he does, so it's great reading anyway. And there's also a two-book review by Jenny Uglow of two books that I think we've seen on this channel about Lord Byron, or about, rather specifically, the women in his life. She reviews In Byron's Wake, The Turbulent Lives of Byron's Wife and Daughter, and by Miranda Seymour, and she also reviews Ada Lovelace and the Making of a Computer Scientist by Christopher Hollings, Ursula Martin, and Adrian Rice. And I read both of those books. I am a huge Byron fan and will usually read anything to do with him. And I thought the books, both of them, strained. The strain was evident. I didn't get the impression that I wasn't swept away, and I like to be in my nonfiction. Here in Nonfiction November, I like to be swept away, especially if it's a subject that I know really well. If I open a book on a subject that I know well enough so that I know for sure that the author is not going to tell me anything new, then I want to be swept away by how they're telling me their approach to it. And that didn't happen with either one of those books, unfortunately. And there's also Yasmin El-Rashidi does a fantastic review of Winter and Autumn by Ali Smith. I mean, those books have racked up large numbers of reviews, and a lot of those reviews have been really good. Hers stuck out to me as something really, really keepable. In fact, I intend to keep it because I am 100% certain that the publisher is going to come out with all 4 books in this quartet as a box set somewhere down the line, and I will just tuck the review in there. And there was also a review. There was also a review in here of where is it here? There's a review of Your Duck is My Duck, a collection of short stories by Deborah Eisenberg, and the review is by, let me make it out here, Andrew Martin, and he does a very credible job. I don't think I've ever seen him before in the New York Review of Books. At the end of his review, he writes, her stories, especially the recent ones, demand careful attention and rereading in order to trace the delicate lines of connection across and between sections and paragraphs. One gets the sense, when deep inside an Eisenberg story, that she is pushing past her own understanding of what she knows, trying to find and identify the most difficult questions possible. She is alert to the dire signals that are emanating from the country and planet, but she hasn't given up on trying to interpret them. And then he quotes from one of those stories. So many sirens, Keith notices during his brief awakening to the world's cruelties. Have there been so many sirens all along? And that's how the review ends, which is fairly artful. You might think it's easy, but it's actually really tricky to end a review on a quote, and that does a really good job. So perhaps this Andrew Martin person, maybe he has a future in the world of letters. And then the other review in question was the TLS, my beloved TLS, and this one, to my delight, has a large amount on World War I, probably in anticipation of the anniversary. Including the opening essay, which is a long review of a book we've seen on this channel a long time ago. It's by Jorn Leonard. It's the English language translation of his Pandora's Box, an enormous 1,000-page history of World War I. And the review is by Richard Evans, who's a great historian in his own right, and the review is just rock'em sock'em good. Oh, it's just wonderful. And there was also, in this issue, they review a bunch of fiction. And at one point, Alan Murren, who is not a reviewer whose work I know, I don't think. Alan Murren does a short review of Dale Peck's Night Soil, which we saw on this channel and which I read and thought was terrible. I just thought it was terrible, lazy and hollow. And this reviewer didn't fall head over heels in love with the book, but he read it in such a good way. It was a perfect example of a review that will send me back to the book. which I love and which I think is an important function of reviews, especially if you've already read the book. An important function of review, one way or another, is to give you a sense of whether or not you want to read the book, and by extension, whether or not you want to spend the time and the money, both of which are incredibly valuable resources of yours. A review is supposed to give you a sense of that. You know, you can't completely trust the dust jacket copy or anything like that, because it's designed to make you want to read the book. Instead, you go to reviews in part for that, and that's also what helps if you have a reviewer who you trust, who's built up a relationship of trust with you, who hasn't gone wrong that often, who has led you to things you've really liked or warned you away from things, and then you read them anyway and you end up hating them. And that kind of trust is important. And it works for reviewers as well as for people who aren't reviewers. I follow reviewers because I have trusted them. Not to buy a book, of course, but maybe to read it, request it, and read it. I don't know if this review will send me back to Night Soil. I had a pretty firm reaction to it, but I love that feeling. I absolutely love that feeling. Happens to me on a regular basis because, as I've mentioned on this channel, I know a whole lot of book reviewers who are a lot smarter than I am, so it happens on a regular basis for me. And also notable in this issue of the TLS was the letters page. I've mentioned before, the letters page is a place where all people write in to pick fights or defend their good name or whatnot. And one letter in this issue refers to a review of the movie, the Glenn Close movie, The Wife, which was based on a Meg Wolitzer novel and is about a suppressed wife of a literary genius who has had about as much as she could take and breaks in the course of the book and in wonderful and glorious ways. And the movie is glorious. The movie is amazing. And somebody read the review in the TLS and had a peppy comment to make. Dear Sir, I read the recent review by Catherine Hughes of The Wife and came to a halt when a character is described as a, quote, deranged Mary McCarthy type novelist, close quote. I realize I might not be up to speed on all the latest fluctuations in literary reputations, but even so, might I ask what the hell that's supposed to mean? And the reason I get the intonations right on that letter is because I wrote it myself. I got to defend the girl. So we'll see. I don't know if the author were going to respond to that letter. The response would probably be in this issue. The question is probably going to be left to hang. I don't know what it means myself, but there you go. That was some marquee literary stuff. The TLS and the New York Review of Books, fascinating stuff. I know they're not cheap, but if you're interested in that sort of thing, I urge you to subscribe to them. There's nothing like the full-blown both sides conversation. Trust me, if you are only getting your book reactions from crowded places like Amazon and Goodreads, then you're missing out on a different kind of reaction. Someone who is being paid to react might pay closer attention or a different kind of attention. But one way or another, I get these things in the mail and I don't write about them anymore. I used to from my blog, Steve Reads, but I don't anymore. So I felt like I would talk about them and recommend them. And so I'll wrap this in the penny press. That's what I used to call it. I'll wrap this in the penny press up for now. But I'll be back with Book Chat. Thank you, BookTube.